Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third and final theoretical lecture on structural equation modeling. Today we'll be specifically focusing on indirect effects or mediation, and how to estimate it and what is it and what makes it so amazing. As you remember from our last slide from the previous video, we looked at, in our structural model, we looked at how work role fit predicted happiness, and our happiness predicted task performance, but we don't know how what's happening in work role fit, how that relates, how that amount of variance that it predicts, or the impact it has on happiness, how does that impact translate into task performance? We don't know that. And that's basically what we'll be talking about today. So just to summarize, we had initially talked about regressions. We looked at basic introduction to some basic concepts in structural equation modeling. We looked at how do you estimate your structural models. And now we're going to the last part, indirect effects, mediation. So what is mediation and how do we go about assessing for it? So mediation is a very interesting thing. It basically proposes that there is a specific outcome factor, and the specific outcome factor is basically dependent upon the extent towards which your dependent variable activates your mediator, which then, of course, in turn leads to your outcome. We are not just concerned with the direct relationships between factors. Although it's interesting, but it doesn't really tell us anything. And we could have done that in SPSS. We could have done that with the normal least squares approach. What we are really interested in, especially from a structural equation modeling perspective, is we're really trying to understand how and why one factor influences another through someone else. So basically, we're interested in understanding how an explanatory factor, a mediator, translates what's happening in our independent variable into our dependent variable. Okay? So I want to know, we know that work role fit, we know that, what I'm interested in is, I know that person environment fit, if I fit between myself and my work is good, I'm going to be happier. And if I know that if I'm happy, I'm going to perform. But I want to know if there is a big fit between the person that I am, the person I am, and the work that I do, will that then translate into happiness? And will the fact that there is this fit thing, this change in happiness that takes place because of that fit, will that change then lead to task performance? So we basically want to assess we wanted to check happiness explains how or why person environment fit translates or relates to task performance. Okay, so in this case, there's some variables. So our exogenous variables are independent variable. Task performance is our dependent or our endogenous variable, and happiness is basically our mediator, right? Our explanatory factor. So what's important here is also to know that each path, I've given them a name here. So the relationship between person environment fit and happiness is A, between happiness and task performance is B, and there's a direct relationship also between person environment fit and task performance. Now, the original way, there's a Baron and Kelly wrote in 1986, said that in order for you to establish mediation, there needs to be a direct relationship between person environment fit and task performance. There needs to be a direct relationship between person environment fit and happiness and task performance. And then if you put this relationship in, so you put happiness into the equation, then if this relationship C disappears, then there is an indication of mediation. Although there's been a lot of criticism around it, and for the purpose of a lecture to go into it, but yeah, that's kind of like the original way to think about mediation. But mediation from structural equation modeling perspective is present if the indirect effect, so in other words, the relationship between A and B is significantly different from zero. So the change that takes place on the range of subsampling that takes place, or the range of the relationship, does not include zero. Okay, so that's very important for us here. We want to see if the change that happens here, if it goes through happiness and goes to task performance, the statistical estimate should not include 0. Then we have an indicator for mediation. Also needs to be significant, of course. So how do we then get to this thing? We utilize what we call bias-corrected bootstrapping to help us to estimate this confidency interval change. Now, basically what this means is bias-corrected bootstrapping means that you're basically subsampling with your own data, trying to generate a lot more samples to see if there's another sample based on your data, would there be a deviation in any type of change, right? On this linear scale between the lower and upper bound change. And we're interested in this, not the estimate necessarily, but the change itself. Okay. So if there is an indicator of mediation, right? M+, for example, would generate this for you. So if it generates it will also generate the standardized direct effect. I don't think I put it in here, but it also generates your standardized total indirect effect. And that's this estimate here, right? It needs to be significant, of course, so we need to know that there's an indirect effect in this model. That's what that tells us. So there's an indirect effect in that model, and it is significant. Okay? The next thing we have to look at is the confidence intervals, the standardized confidence intervals for the total indirect effect. This is the next thing that we look at in M+. Now, the first thing you'll know is that here where it says estimate, it's exactly the same. This is just your standard estimate that is generated. The lower to upper bound, this is your confidence interval range. Now, what we are interested in is at the 95% confidence interval change. So we're here at upper and lower at 2.5. So what you can see is that the change that takes place, so the range, starts at 0.144 and it goes to 0.578. That does not include 0. So this is not like minus 0.144 and that plus 0.578. So it doesn't include 0, and therefore we have a very strong indicator that we have full mediation. So we have an indirect effect that is significant, and we have the confidence interval range now at the 95% confidence interval, and it does not include 0. Therefore, we have an indication of full mediation. So how would we write this up? We would basically say that happiness then significantly mediates the relationship between person-environment fit and task performance with an estimated standardized indirect effect of 0.29. That's this estimate. And the percentile of the bootstrap, the bias-corrected bootstrap, is from 0.14, and that does not include 0. I see I entered the standardized effect here. The same principle applies. I just didn't put the results into the slide, but you wrote exactly the same thing out from the standardized results. So with that said, we can now see that how to test mediation. We are looking at the indirect effect of that the relationship between person-environment fit and happiness has on task performance. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I think that was our last lecture for the series. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and let me know if you have any questions or comments. Just leave it in the